Good day. It's Dave Whittier from Ally Emergency Management, and welcome to the second in our continuing series of videos on the operational planning process. This one is assessing the environment. Now, if you were to take a look at some of the publications on the operational planning process, this portion would actually be known as the intelligence preparation of the battle space. Uh, that didn't seem like it would really be applicable to those outside the military. Although once I took some time and looked at it from a different perspective, there is a lot of things in there that I think are absolutely applicable. So I've taken the liberty of going through that portion of the OPP and gleaning out some of the things that I think you might find useful. Just for context, the two maps that you see in front of you are actually from an exercise I gave some of my students when I was in the military to assess the ground that they were about to solve a tactical problem in. We're not going to do that, but I just thought you might find it interesting. The reason that the environmental analysis is important, and it's not environment in terms of protecting the environment or environmental impact. It's environment in the context of the things that are around you that might impact your ability to succeed. And every problem exists within an environment like that. And depending on your organization and the nature of the problem, the environment will necessarily be composed of several different factors. Things like maybe your competitors if you're a business, or your customers, or the citizens in your area if you're a government, your partners, your stakeholders, the weather, the ground. There's a whole bunch of things that might have an impact on how you deal with the problem that you've been faced. So the primary purpose of this section, assessing the environment, is to select the factors that might impact the solution to your problem. So by definition, not every factor will be applicable, but by going through this process, you can identify the factors which will impact your solution and take a look at how you can either leverage advantages, if there are some, or mitigate disadvantages. Environmental assessment, like the operational planning process in general, ends up being a cycle where you go through the different stages in order, starting with defining environment and working your way around. Depending on the nature of the problem, you might be dealing with other organizations that are operating as an antagonist or a rival, which is why I've got the evaluate the competitor part. Or there is something that is actively planning or something that exists to keep you from achieving your objective. These days, I think it's quite legitimate to say COVID-19 is a rival, is an antagonist, is an enemy. And what that particular agent is doing is absolutely part of our problem-solving environment. But it could be competition in a business sense. In a public safety context, it could be protesters or other bad actors. It could be fires or floods, could be weather. There's a whole bunch of things in there. So let's talk about defining the environment. And what this is doing is it's a process that we try to understand the specific people or social or economic aspects that are applicable to the problem that you're trying to solve. And there's no right answer. This is a process you have to go through and think about the elements that might influence your operations. The aspects you choose will depend on the problem you're trying to solve and which of these various aspects might affect your likelihood of success. There are a number of different categories, and I've listed these 6: area, structure, capabilities, organizations, people, and events that hopefully will get you started in thinking about some of these environmental factors. For example, when we talk about area, you might be looking at political boundaries if you're a municipal or provincial government. There might be population status or demographics, weather analysis, or even terrain. The location of rivers and lakes might be important in your planning, depending on what it is that you're doing. For structure, you want to consider how a structure's location or function can support or hinder your operation. Things like bridges, communication towers, power grids, road networks, that might be important. All depends again on the nature of your problem. Examples of some capabilities could be the sewer system, the storm drains, water distribution system, electrical distribution system, the trash pickup, medical, security. Organizations that, again, depending on your problem, might factor in affecting your solution. And it could be political parties, it could be other companies, it could be non-governmental organizations, business groups, contractors, media, this sort of thing. And people. Could be individuals like government officials, politicians. In the public safety sphere, it could be people that are leading protest groups. It could be the general public. It could be your customers, sources and contacts, special interest groups, lobbyists. And finally, events. Events that may affect how you do your plan, when you do your plan, signifying some of the constraints and restraints. So possible examples might be elections, statutory holidays, business activities, government decisions, and that's big these days. So I can't tell you exactly which part of the environment you need for your particular problem. Don't know what your problem is, but in order to be as general as possible, these are the kind of things you want to take some time to look at. And when you're assessing them, you look at them in the context of, can they help me solve my problem? Could they hinder me solving my problem? Once you've decided on your effects, once you've defined your environment, the things that you're going to focus on because you think they're going to help you or hinder you with your problem, then you want to take a look at each one of them and describe the effects. So for each of those aspects you took a look at in the previous stage, how do they affect your operations, either positively or negatively? An example, the effect of bridges and road networks, or lack of bridges and road networks when you're doing your earthquake planning. This one's going to be a key because it's going to have a specific impact on how you come up with your solution. The next step is to take a look at your antagonist or your rival, your competitor, if such a thing exists in the problem you're dealing with. And it's going to depend on what kind of organization you are. So for example, in business, you're going to have competitors. They're looking for a similar or a piece of the market share for a product or service that you are providing. In order to solve your problem in a business context, you need to understand how your competitors have organized and operated under similar circumstances in the past, because that will give you some insight as to how they might operate in this circumstance. An example for a public safety problem might be historical information on protest groups that can be used to develop a model of their action currently. For folks that do disaster response planning, there are extensive models for flood and fire activity that allow planners to take a look at past behavior for floods and fire and estimate what the behavior is going to be in order for them to continue with their plans, allocate resources, place resources, and make sure they're ready. So this is the kind of thing. In our current circumstances, the infection models of COVID-19 should figure prominently in any kind of operational planning. What you're going to need to keep your staff safe and for how long. When we can expect certain aspects of commerce to be opened up again, and what are the different circumstances that might cause different types of models. So these are all things that would be done in the context of evaluating a competitor or a rival. Step 4 would be to determine the competitor or rival course of action. And based on the previous step, which is evaluate your competitor or your rival, what are likely objectives and courses of action available to your competitors? What are likely outcomes of natural disasters based on your evaluation? And these conclusions later on in the operational planning process will allow you to compare your own courses of action with your rivals' courses of action. And it allows you to better understand some of the pros and cons when you're in the COA analysis and COA selection phase of the operational planning process. Because as you are working in the environment, other organizations are working in the environment as well. Some of them may be working at cross purposes to you. There's also the concept of most likely and most dangerous. This really applies to cases where you've got a competitor that can make decisions and has their own planning process. And I think it could also be applied to situations where the environment has been modeled and there are a number of different models. In the case of where you're dealing with an individual or a group that has their own decision cycle, most likely course of action is something you would derive when you evaluate your competitor based on past practices and the current situation. Are they likely to continue and act the way they've acted before? That becomes their most likely. Most dangerous is when you imagine that your competitor knows your plan. And knowing your plan, what would they do to try to maximize their own likelihood of success? And that allows you two courses of action: most likely, most dangerous being to you. In cases where there are fires or floods or COVID-19, a lot of the models are already determined for you. Most likely, again, is statistically based on past occurrences. Most dangerous is some of the outliers, the ones that are most likely to cause damage to infrastructure and most likely to injure or kill people. And those would become the most likely and the most dangerous that you're going to use later on in the OPP. This one was pretty quick. It's quick to describe. It generally takes a fair bit of time, but it's very, very important because, as I said before, it helps you understand the environment that your decisions are being made and what are the factors and aspects of that environment which could affect how you move forward and succeed. Our next video is going to be stage 1 of the OPP, the initiation phase. As always, if you are enjoying what you're hearing or there's something that I'm missing that you would like to know more about, please send me an email at the address on the slide. And as always, please feel free to look at our website, yourally.ca, for some of the resources we've put up for people who are doing planning for themselves and their companies in these times. Thank you for your attention.